Hello again and welcome back. If you've been following this series, then in the last video, you'll know that we spoke about probably one of the more important aspects of programming, and that is branching or making conditional statements. In Python, we did this with if, elif, or else. In this video, we're going to move away from conditionals and start talking about something that is just as important, if not probably more important, when writing programs in Python for digital humanities projects. And that's going to be loops. In Python, there's essentially two different kinds of loops, and they both perform really the same tasks. And oftentimes, it will come down to preference and which one you want to use over the other. In this video, I'm going to speak a lot more about for loops. That's typically the one I use on a regular occasion just for preference. I just like the way it's structured. It seems cleaner. Oftentimes, you can get your code tighter with a for loop. I will, however, speak about a while loop because you will encounter them every now and again, and I still use them occasionally when the situation kind of warrants it. And you'll know when to use which one for what specific task kind of intuitively, but I'll explain kind of the advantages of both throughout this video. And as we move through this series, you'll see that I will be using both while and for loops. And when I do, I will explain why I am choosing that loop over something else. Or if I'll tell you if it's just an arbitrary choice and just my personal preference for for loops. So without further ado, let's get started. So what is a loop? A loop in Python or any programming language is a way to just iterate over something a set number of times or an infinite number of times. And the way in which we construct a loop in Python is going to be the same for while and for loops, but with one difference. With a for loop, you're going to start off with the word for, and in a while loop, you're going to start off with the word why. So let's go ahead and just talk about while loops first. So we're going to set x to equal to 0. Once again, we saw this before in another video. And we are going to say while x is greater than 5, we want it to do something. So we're going to use our colon, we're going to hit enter, and it's automatically going to indent for us. If your IDE does not indent, then you must indent here. So we're going to say while x is greater than 5, less than 5, we want to print off x is less than 5. And then what we're going to do is we're going to increase the value of x. X is now going to be equal to x plus 1, which is going to bump it up one point, one value. So when we run this, we'll see, let's go ahead and run it. We'll see that down here, it's told us that x is less than 5, x is less than 5, x is less than 5, and then it stops. And the reason why the while loop has stopped is because x at this point is no longer less than 5. We're now dealing with x being equal to or greater than 5. And so once that condition has been met, the while loop breaks. It breaks. And that's very useful for certain tasks. But I find myself more often than not wanting to use for loops just because of the way in which DH projects naturally structure themselves. So let's go ahead and comment this out. And let's make a very simple for loop. And what you're going to notice is that for loops are, in my opinion, much more useful for when trying to iterate through lists. And the reason why for loops are better for this is because of the way you can just kind of structure them. So we can say for name and names. Notice I have two lists up here. I have a list of names and a list of ages. Let's go ahead and do something to make this not work correctly. So we're going to say 27. So we're going to say for name and names, we want to do a very specific thing. We want it to print, let's do this, print name. So what I'm going to tell it to do is to simply go through. So I've done for name and names, and this can be anything. We can do this with x even. You can pick something that is arbitrary as long as your value is consistent. In Pythonic syntax, it's typically correct to either use I if you're trying to iterate over a range, which I'm going to get to in a second, or to get to what each of these items are in a list. So in a list of names, naturally, The Pythonic way to do this is to say for name in names. But really, this doesn't matter. This is just proper Python syntax. So what it's going to do when we run this code is, if we look down here on the output, it is going to simply go through this list, and for each name, it's going to print off the name. It's that simple. This might not seem like it's all that powerful right now, but I promise you, when you're trying to iterate through 22,000 data points in an Excel spreadsheet, this is very, very useful. Because you don't just print off stuff in Python. When we get to, looks like when we start getting to more complicated stuff with lecture number 12, you'll see that we can start storing this data differently and manipulating it and then restoring it differently. That's why while loops are going to be so powerful. What would happen, however, if I wanted to have something that looked kind of like name? I'm going to do an F command. I'll do this from the very beginning. So we want to go across this list, but we want to match up the ages to each person. And pay close attention. I've added this 27 in here. It's the the fourth value in the ages list, and we only have 3 sets of values because we have 0, 1, 2, and 3 in the names list. So what happens when I want to do this for? How do I want to do it? So I'm going to do for I in range, I'm going to say the length of names. I want to print off I. Now again, this is going to do the same thing. It's not very Pythonic because, oops, because it requires a lot more code than what we just did a second ago, but I will show you why this is useful to structure for commands in this manner. As you can see here, I have simply done a for loop for I for the iteration and the range of the length of names. So up here, so it's going to be 4. Print off names, and I've indexed, if you notice here, I use the brackets and names number I. That's going to go through. So the first time it goes through, it's going to pull names position 0. And then it's going to pull position 1, position 2, and position 3. And we see down here that it did just that. What if, however, I wanted to do that, and we're going to use an... We're not going to do F commands right now. We're going to do that. I want a space. Is the age of... oh, this was unnecessary. There we go. Is the age of, and we want to put in a string, because we're working with strings right now, ages, and we want to do ages I. Take a second and think to yourself what's going to happen when I run this code. All right, let's go ahead and see if you're right. And what do you know? You are. What has happened is that because this is out of range, it's simply going to iterate across this list. So it stops right here at number 4. What if, for whatever reason, I wanted to mix these two up and I wanted to do ages instead, the length of ages? Now what do you think will happen? It's returned an error. And if you look down here, you'll see why it has returned an error. It is specifically an index error. And the reason why it's pulled an index error is because we've changed the length to this one. And because we're dealing with the length of ages and not names, we are dealing with 5 iterations. So when it goes through and it tries to print this off, now it's going to have a problem. It's not going to be able to do it because the length of names is not 5. So when it goes to try to pull names 5, there's nothing there. This problem is solved, however, when you simply add in another one. We're going to add in Shiva. And what do you know? It's now spelled correctly. And this is the way my mother spells her names. That's why I've done that way. So this is how you create a simple for loop based around the range of an item. But let's say we, for whatever reason, don't want the for loop to execute and waste time if we have a long list, if these two don't match in the same number. Well, we can nest our for loop inside of a conditional. So if the length of names is equal to the length of ages, then, colon, do this. Else, check your lists we should probably do print. Print, check your list because they don't match in length. So now we're going to run this. And this is going to prevent us from actually returning an error because it's going to tell us that we need to double check our data. And look down here. It's told us that they don't match. Now we can get a little bit more complicated with this. We can use an F command. And we can do do not match. So we can use an F command, and what we'll say that names has, I want to say the length of names, and ages has length of ages. Never actually tried to do this with an F command yet. I'm still just working with them, but I think this should work just fine. Yep, and it does. And it tells us down here a bit more explicitly that check your list because they do not match, and length names has 4, and ages has 5, which is specifically what we have up here. So that's how you can kind of use a for loop within a conditional to kind of make sure that a certain condition is met before it proceeds further. And notice that the rule of indentation still holds true. I have indented for, and I've indented within the for loop. This is very important. When Python reads these indentations, it reads it as a specific layer, and it knows not to go on to this next layer, or not to return back to this main layer until this loop and this layer have completed their task. So it's a way of layering your code. And you're going to find as we go through that we are going to do this on a very regular basis. Every single program that you write will have some form of indentation or will be layered in oftentimes multiple ways. Sometimes you'll even need to layer something 4 or 5 times, depending on how complex your Python code is. So that's how you kind of layer a for loop. So I'm going to kind of delete this real quick. And I want to speak a little bit about a very important, a very important concept you're going to come across. And that is going to be for I in range. And let's do this. For I in range, I'm going to do 0, print I. Okay. So I have a statement here. For I in range, R-A-N-G-E, range, 0, 10, do this. What this is telling Python to do is that for every instance of something in a range of 0 to 10, print off that number. And it's going to do that. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way down. This is a very powerful, simple but powerful part of Python that you should really learn right off the bat. I use it in every single project. What these range attributes tell it to do is to have a start and an end. And there's another one we can do, and we'll see that in a second. But let's first demonstrate this start and end. Notice down here when I ran it with a 5 to 10, it starts at 5 and it ends at 10. So it goes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Wonderful. There is, however, a third attribute, and you can change this to 5, you can change this to 0, so when you run it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just remember that the first position is the start, the second position is the stop, and the third position is the, I believe it's called the skip, officially. What it is a way of, think of it in your head, so every second number. So let's print this off, and we get 0, pull it up here, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So it skips every 2 numbers. You're going to find that this is very, very useful and that you're going to have to do this on multiple occasions. This is going to be particularly true when you are looking at databases online and you need to web scrape, which is going to be how you kind of extract data from websites. And the reason why you're going to have to do this is because you're oftentimes going to have to identify a pattern in a form and skip certain HTML markers. So you sometimes will want to grab every 10th specific HTML tag. I'll explain this when we get to web scraping, which I think is coming up in, yeah, lectures numbers 19 to 21. But I want to get this concept out there right now, just so that you have it. And this will also hold true, by the way, for our Python script up here. So let's say we want to just change this. We want to make this. We just want it to start and run the length of names. So for I and names, so we want it to run, print off I, and we want it to end. Yeah, let's just do that. So notice here I have got print off, and it's the same exact thing. We're going to start here, and it's just going to keep on running indefinitely until names ends. We can end it at 4, be more explicit if we already know. That doesn't let us do it, see? So this is just a way to actually kind of use the range function to actually perform a finite task. So the range function is going to be something that you use on a regular basis. Sometimes you're going to want to break out of a loop. And the way in which you do that is by using break commands. And I thought I would talk about that in this video, just a very, very light amount. Let's do that. And we're going to print I. Print I if I equals let's do 5. And notice down here I've put in a simple break. And what it's done is, even though I have a range of 0 to 10, and it doesn't skip at all, and it's printing off I, doing great, when it comes to this conditional, which is in my for loop, it says that if I equals 5, then break. So at that point, once it prints off 5, because it's going to print off first, once it gets to 5, it's going to break. Now here's something that you should probably start to learn right now. I'm going to just switch the position of that statement. And now, take a guess and think about what might happen in the output. All right. Pause it right now because I'm going to go ahead and run it and see if you're right. If you were right, give yourself a pat on the back. By switching those two statements around, I only printed off up till 4. Why do you think that might be? The reason is because this is now something that's being met first before the print statement. So when I had it the other way around, it was printing off everything, and then I asked if I is equal to 5, break. Here, however, I said if I is equal to 5, then break, before it had a chance to print off the number 5. So think about your positions of your breaks in your loops. And you'll need to form these different ways. And there's other things that you can do. We can have it do this, which is simply just going to pass over and keep going. You're going to find that you'll need to do that in more complex loops. I'm going to get to those as we actually start addressing greater complex code in Python. But here's one thing that we haven't talked about, and it's one that's worth talking about right now. Let's say we want to go back to this idea, the range, the length of names. And we're going to make a new list. We're going to call it, let's do this. We're going to call it names 3. You know what? I'm going to intentionally make a mistake right now. We're going to do names 3, make it equal to nothing. So it's a blank list right now. And we're going to say for name in, oh, no, sorry. We're going to say names3.append. So we're going to add to it. What we're going to add to it is names I. So essentially, we're going to keep on throwing more and more names into that list as we iterate through everything. Now what we're going to do is we're going to print off names 3. What do you think will happen when we do this? It's kind of a trick question. So as it goes through and iterates across all of these names, we are going to simply move all these names into a new list called names 3. So take a second. I'm going to run the code. Pause it if you want to. Oh, well, if you said that we were going to get an error because I forgot to add a parentheses, you were right. All right, here we go. Now, when I print off the output, down here. All I have for names3 is simply Cindy. Now that should not be right, and here's why. Because I've appended each of these names into it. So I should have Tom, Jerry, Bob, and Cindy. But all I have is Cindy. The reason why I only have Cindy there is because names3 is removed from memory with each aspect of the loop. So with each portion of the loop, names3 is changed and erased. And the only thing that is stored in memory is the last iteration. So only Cindy is in there. When you're going to find yourself having to do this constantly, creating new lists from previous lists. And the way in which you need to do this is you need to store that list outside of your for loop. So now when I run it, helps if I print off names3 to demonstrate my point. Now when I run it, you'll notice that everything is there in names3. And the reason is because I've stored names3 outside of the for loop, which means that the way in which Python is going to store it in memory is with it outside of the for loop. Does this make sense? I hope it does. It's a very simple concept, but one that will cause you to have headache after headache after headache. If ever you are running into a problem with a for loop and you're trying to create a list with a for loop, simply ask yourself, did I have my list, did I create my list in the right position? And chances are you probably didn't. Always store your lists outside of the loop in which you want to append to them. That's a major, major rule. So that's kind of the basic things I wanted to cover in this video, how to kind of create a for loop, how to create a while loop, kind of the purpose of them. They are essentially ways to just iterate across large quantities of data automatically so that you don't have to manually go through and do tasks. And if we want to go back to our video or a sample code that I had in the initial video of this series, when I try to woo the audience, we can see now you should be able to understand just about everything in this code. And you didn't understand any of it before. It looked like magic probably to you. But with the exception of the import OS, which I'm going to get to later, and the exception of the actual file and the path here, the make directory command function, everything else should make somewhat sense to you. We're going to talk about this, how I'm opening up a text file in lecture number 12, but everything else should work. So for each line in the text file, which I've called as simply if, so it's an object, I want to print off a line. And what this is going to do, let me pull up this text file, is it's going to go through this text file and read and print off each of these lines. And now it's going to count. So it's going to keep track of what line is actually there. And it's going to say that the first iteration is line 0, and we're going to add it to 1 so that the first time it creates a new line, it's going to be lecture number 1. And what this is doing is it's creating a new line object. And this line object is going to take every case of a comma and replace it with a space. It's going to take every case of a colon and replace it with a space. Every instance of a backslash, replace it with a space. Every instance of a space now, replace it with an underscore, which is what we see over here. And then replace all the end breaks, which we can't see, this is the separation of a line, and replace it with nothing. And then it's going to say if the count is less than 10, then the path needs to look like this. And the reason why I've done that is because I want to have a hanging 0, so that 00 course files, 001 course files come before 10 functions and 11 classes. And then if they are not, if the count is in fact greater, 10 or greater, then make the path look like this, without a hanging 0 that we see right there. And then it's simply going to create those files in the directory, or those folders in the directory. That's all I've done. So this is a very simple Python script, and one that you might not fully understand right now, but you can understand some of the basic tasks that are being performed in it, because you now understand what for loops are, you now understand how to print things, you now understand how to keep track of an integer outside of a loop, while at the same time increasing its value within a loop, and you know how to create a new string object by manipulating a previous string object with replace. And you also now know about conditionals, how to use conditionals to perform specific tasks, and how to say that if a conditional is not met, then do a different task. So all of this, for the most part, this part, the core of the program, you should understand, or should at least have the ability to go through and slowly kind of parse it out and get used to it and get acquainted with it. That's all for this video though. Hopefully you've found this informative and useful, and I encourage you to take time and go back and rewatch this video several times as you create your own for and while loops. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this right now is because these are going to be used in every program that you write for DH. Have a good day.